Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to this first training session for mentors for the Patient Group Mentoring Programme 2023 to 2024. So I'm just letting more people in while I'm introducing. Yeah, welcome mentors. It's so great to get you all in the room for the first time to kick off this training period. My name's Hannah. For those of you who don't know me, I am a senior projects officer at Beacon for Rare Diseases. I'm also the program lead for the mentoring program. So you will be seeing a lot of me, hearing a lot of me throughout this next year. So it's really exciting to meet everyone for the first time. I'm just going to ask everyone, if you wouldn't mind, to just introduce yourself really quickly in the chat box so we can see who we've got in the room. Let us your name, the organization you come from. And also, if you could please let me know if you could have a celebrity mentor, dead or alive, who would it be? So have a little think on that, and please put all your answers in the chat. Can't wait to read them. And while you guys are doing that, I'll give you a quick introduction to Beacon. You will hear more about Beacon at the welcome event and more about the scheme in general. So I'm just going to give you a really quick overview for now. We are a UK-based rare disease charity. We have a vision of no rare journey alone and a mission of building a united rare disease community with patient groups at its heart. Our work focuses around three main areas. Our main focus is patient group training. We help groups meet their rare challenges by supporting them to grow, form, and professionalize. Another focus is rare research, where we help patient groups find a place at the heart of research so they can ensure better outcomes and improve access. And we also strive to create a rare disease community by facilitating connections and collaboration. A little bit of housekeeping for today's session. If you are having any technical issues, please let me know. You can do that in the chat. There will be dedicated time for questions throughout the session. We can't always keep up with your questions when they're typed in the chat. So if you wouldn't mind just waiting until these dedicated times, till the Q&As, or just use the raise hand function that you can see at the bottom of the Zoom options, and we'll come back to you. And if you could keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking, and you will be able to access the slides and the recordings at the end of the session. Using subtitles, so subtitles are available if you need them, live transcript as well. You can turn these on at the bottom of your screen. There's an option for that there. You can also turn them off if you aren't interested in having them. Okay, and on to today's session. This is the agenda. Welcome by me. And then we're going to go on to the core part of the session, the mentoring training by Flóra Raffai. And then we're going to do some breakout activities, and then I'm going to conclude the training, sorry. So for now, I'd really like to introduce Flóra, who's going to be hosting this next chunk of the training today.
Hello, everyone. It is so wonderful to join you and also to recognise a few faces in the audience. I absolutely love some of the celebrity mentors people are suggesting, of Toto Wolff from Mercedes and Robin Williams. I now want to steal all of those as my mentors as well. So let me just bring up my slides for you. So what we're going to talk through in the next sort of 40 minutes to 50 minutes is really about how you can get ready and get started with your mentoring relationships. I'm absolutely delighted to be with you. For those of you who have been with Beacon for a while, you might remember me from Find a Cure days. And I was also very pleased to be a mentor on previous mentoring programs as well. So to get into it, what we'll really be doing is we'll be going through sort of what mentoring is, what it isn't, and then how you can get ready in that mentoring mentality and how you could start setting up a new relationship with your mentees. We'll pause for some Q&A then we'll go into how you might go about structuring your mentoring session, I'll share some top techniques for mentoring conversations, and then also how you might bring in the confidence competence matrix in assessing how to pitch how you're supporting your mentee. Again, we'll have a pause for questions, and then we'll go into the final part of my presentation around how you can give feedback in constructive and supportive ways, especially in that mentor-mentee relationship. I'll wrap up and then hand back to Hannah. So as we get started, I just want to invite you for a minute or so to just write down for yourself, what's your intention for this webinar and what do you hope to gain from this session? And the reason I'm starting with this is you'll see it follow through in the mentoring sessions, that it's always very good to start any kind of training environment with a very clear goal of what you want to get out of it. So if I just time us for about a minute or so to write this down, and then if you want to share, you're welcome to come off mute or put it in the chat as we get going. So I'll just give you a minute to do that. Okay, so if I can bring you back, I see some people have added it in the chat as well about gaining a clearer understanding of the role between mentor and how to meet the mentee's expectations, making sure your first success wasn't a fluke, more structured conversations. Does anyone want to come off mute to share their reflection?
Hi, Flora. This is Kamlesh here.
Hi, Kamlesh.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
I have been mentor for several years on this program, but I think there is still always more to learn. So keen to learn more from you, other speakers, and other people on this call.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kamlesh. Good to see you again as well. Brilliant. Well, then let's get started, and hopefully we'll be able to hit all the points you're talking about. So this is the only case of extended reading on a screen in the presentation, but I thought it'd be useful to get started with what is the sort of official definition of mentoring. And this is from the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, or EMCC for short, and I really do recommend them as a place to go for resources. They do their own webinars and things as well, all about mentoring and coaching. So if you really want to delve more into this topic, they're a great resource. So rather than reading out the whole paragraph, I'll just highlight the key aspects that I think are useful to think about in your mentoring relationship. So firstly, mentoring is about having a learning relationship with your mentee, which means that it is very much focused on finding ways to support development. And then it's through sharing your skills, knowledge, and expertise in a supportive relationship. And so that's where we'll come on to how this then differs from something like training. But the way you share this is through having developmental conversations. So this might be your mentee coming to you and saying, I don't know what to do in situation X. And you would have a developmental conversation in which you explore and upskill them around that situation. It could be more broad, of them coming to you and asking to learn about your leadership style. And that's where you might share your experience and talk through how you've gone to where you are and what are the different aspects and facets that you've developed along the way. Or it could even be role modeling, where you are demonstrating a certain type of professionalism or skill in a situation with the mentee. So you might be accompanying them in a meeting, or it could just be purely how you present yourself in your mentoring relationship is already role modeling how one exists in this sort of health space for your mentee. The other thing to really bear in mind as well is that this is a two-way partnership. So as much as we focus on, as a mentor, what you can help your mentee achieve, I'd invite you to be open and recognize how much you'll get back from your mentee as well. And I know personally, as when I've been a mentor, one of the biggest value has been how much I've learned from seeing how my mentee approaches things differently. And that has then helped me develop as well. So do open yourself up to how much you might learn as well. And the final aspect I really wanted to stress is that a mentoring relationship is one that values differences. So as much as it is about you sharing your experience and knowledge, the outcome is not to have a replicated version of you in your mentee. It's about helping them adapt that in their own situation. And it could be they decide to go in a different direction, and that's absolutely fine. It's always with that intention of supporting and developing, not replicating. So I hope that confirms your expectations in coming in as a mentor as well. So I think it's always very useful to also touch on what mentoring isn't, to again start establishing those healthy boundaries for the mentoring relationship. So firstly, mentoring is not training. Training is a situation where there's much more of a divide between teacher and student, and that power dynamic is much more teacher speaking to student and student absorbing and then taking away and applying. Mentoring is much more of a level relationship where there's that dynamic, there's that close relationship between the two of you, where there's information passing back and forth, and it's much more focused on the application of knowledge rather than just the delivery of knowledge. The other difference is mentoring and coaching. So these two often get confused, and there is a lot of overlap between them, which is why they can be confused for each other. But it's good to think of them as two distinct aspects. So mentoring is about you as the mentor and your knowledge and helping the other person apply that. Whereas with coaching, that tends to be a much more focused on the coach trying to get the best out of their coachee, but not really giving that much from their own knowledge. So that's much more question-based and helping personal exploration. Whereas mentoring is a bit more directive in you actively putting in your opinions and thoughts into what you think the other person might want to do. And the final thing to bring up, which I'm sure we are all aware of, but does need to be stressed, is that mentoring is not therapy or counselling. It is about the professional setting and about supporting people in thriving in their patient group and in their advocacy work. But it's not about delving into the personal lives of individuals and how you can help them overcome personal challenges. And this is important to mention for you to establish that boundary for yourself of knowing where you're comfortable in how much personal life you're willing to talk about, and also feeling confident in when you start to feel it's going outside of that boundary to be able to say, you know, I really appreciate you sharing and responding with empathy, but I'm not the best person to talk to about this. So let's maybe see if we can signpost you to better people who are more equipped to talk about that aspect of personal life. So that's really just to empower you to know it's okay to have those boundaries and not delve into that area. And my rule of thumb whenever I'm mentoring or coaching is always to make sure that I'm not unpacking something I can't then help the person repack by the end of the session. So it's okay to stop conversations going in that direction. So with those boundaries in mind, how might you approach your mentoring relationship? I think the absolute number one first thing to do is to make sure that you acknowledge your belief in the mentee. And this means that you recognize their potential to grow and to achieve their aims. And then from there, recognize that your job as a mentor is to help them achieve that potential and get them along that journey. But always has to start with that absolute belief that the mentee is capable of addressing the challenges that they're facing and going towards the goals that they're setting. The next fundamental thing that you need to bear in mind as a mentor is to just simply pay attention. The power of having half an hour or an hour with someone where their full attention is on you cannot be overstated. The quality of thinking that you can achieve is enormous. And it's something that in today's world where we have, you know, emails, messages, everything coming in, carving out that space where you are just fully focused on that mentee will have an enormous impact for them. That alone will have such a huge impact in helping them get to that journey even before you start sharing your wisdom and knowledge. So make sure that as you approach any interaction with them, you are turning off everything, muting everything, and just making sure you can be absolutely present with them for that period of time that you're talking. The third aspect is something that it's important to check in ourselves, that the mentoring relationship is ultimately about serving the mentee and helping them achieve what it is they want to achieve. So it's the mentee that should be shining, not you. And this is just a little ego check of, it can be easy when we're in a mentoring relationship and people are looking up to you and asking for your advice to start to have that ego inflate a little bit and think, oh, aren't I clever? But it's always to come back to, it's always in service of the mentee. So it's absolutely fine and encouraged to share your experience and share all of your knowledge, but not for the sake of you just looking good. I'm sure that's not applicable to anyone in the room, but it does need to be mentioned. The fourth aspect in being a good mentor is to help maintain neutrality. So while you're absolutely there to support the mentee and that you're believing in that mentee, it's important that in your conversations, you don't get too sucked in to that mentee's perspective. And that is one of the most valuable things you can do as a mentor, is being able to offer a bit more objectivity in looking at what they're sharing with you, the challenges they're sharing, and trying to see it a bit from other people's perspectives. And that can then help that mentee overcome whatever challenge they're facing, and again, have that broader perspective of how they can go forward. So it's valuable to remember, especially if they're potentially angry at someone or upset with someone, to just try and be more of that objective voice of thinking, well, what might be happening with the other person or other stakeholder, and how could that inform a constructive way forward? Another aspect of maintaining neutrality is to maintain a no blame, no judgment zone. So this is, again, coming back to, it might be that things go wrong, it might be that mistakes are made, but always maintaining that no blame. There's no need to pile on and start going, well, why did you do that? Why didn't you do that instead? It's about helping the mentee learn from whatever might have happened, whatever challenges they might be encountering, and moving on in that constructive way. And through that, you're also role modeling that behavior to the mentee, that assigning blame and assigning guilt is not valuable to anyone. So if you role model that as a mentor, that can then really help them as a leader going forward with their patient group and their teams and other stakeholders they're working with. Sixth aspect is not to hide your opinions. So especially in sort of classic British culture, we can be very prone to hiding our opinions in questions of, instead of saying, I think that, you might go, well, don't you think that in this situation, this could be, and that's not helpful. It can get very confusing for the other person. So be open and honest about your opinions, and then offer them up and be ready for the mentee to either accept it or reject it. And again, coming back to the neutrality, it's okay for them to make that decision, and not to take it personally if they decide not to follow your opinion on something. And the final aspect to setting yourself up as a positive mentor is to avoid doing what I call drive-by questioning. And that's where you pepper someone with about 10 different questions in order, which, rather than helping expand thinking, tends to make people feel very overwhelmed and anxious. So instead of going, well, what's going on here? What could you do? Well, how about you do this? What about that? What about this? Making sure that whenever you ask a question, you hold a pause and you allow the person to first think about their response and then come back with a response before you follow it up with the next question and the next question and next question. So again, just holding that space for the other person to think, pay them attention, and then move on to the next session. So really, if you take away nothing else from this webinar, if you stick by these 7 main principles, you will be set up to being a very positive, supportive mentor. Obviously, I won't stop there. So we'll carry on with other aspects of how you can build that into your relationship with the mentee. So as you're setting out with your mentoring relationship, some of the ways you can build this in is around that first meeting that you have with your mentee. And so having I've sort of got 5 steps here of how you might go about setting up that first conversation. I would recommend that you start with just a mutual introduction of backgrounds. And this will help establish for both of you that respect for one another and all the experience that you're both bringing to this relationship, and opens it up to recognition of that two-way partnership that mentoring is. And it also helps you start to see where some of those overlaps might be that you maybe initially didn't realize that you had, where expertise might line up, or where your knowledge might start filling some of the gaps that the mentee is recognizing in themselves. And it just starts building that trusting relationship of you recognize yourself person to person, peer to peer, rather than sort of teacher to pupil. Then I really recommend that it's useful to start thinking about what are those active goals for your mentoring relationship, and supporting the mentee in exploring where they'd like to be by the end of the partnership. And I know that some of this they will have already had to do as part of their application and getting ready, but it's just useful to reconfirm that for yourselves and revisit the feasibility of whether your expertise can really help achieve all of those goals, or if there are some that you might want to focus in on and prioritize. By setting those goals, you're also starting to establish those boundaries between what is training, coaching, and therapy by getting it very focused on specific professional goals. It just means that those boundaries are a lot easier to maintain going forward. And that really comes into my next point of boundaries around the relationship itself. So it's useful to start talking about what context and what situations will the two of you have contact in. Is it something like you set up a monthly call, a weekly call? Is it anytime they've got a question, they can give you a call? Do they need to email you first? Do you need to email them first? That kind of aspect of just setting out the parameters of the relationship so everyone feels comfortable in knowing how to contact one another, and where things are sort of safe and trusting. And really establishing those expectations at the start is a really strong way to lay that foundation to a trusting relationship. The fourth aspect of this is about talking about acceptable behaviors. And this again is about maintaining that professionalism between the two of you, but it goes much deeper into what is acceptable within a mentoring relationship. So some of the things that I recommend that you think about are, how does your mentee feel most safe and most listened to? And there may be very big differences depending on your cultural backgrounds on what you find to be a supportive, encouraging behavior as opposed to someone else. So one example of this is looking someone in the eyes. In England, this is usually seen as a sign of respect and that you're listening to someone. But in other cultures and people who may be neurodivergent, this can feel quite intimidating and off-putting. And that might already create a barrier between the two of you if you're trying to be very encouraging and staring at them and they're feeling very on edge and they're not opening up as a result. So that kind of acceptable behavior of what kind of behaviors make you feel safe is a good thing to talk about. The other aspect as well is, how are people comfortable with being challenged? So as a mentor, one of the key things that you'll be doing is helping your mentee think about things in different ways and maybe doing different approaches that they're not used to. And so it's really valuable to think about how are they comfortable in receiving that potential challenge to their norms and their comfort zone in a way that, again, continues that trusting relationship. So is it that before you give challenging feedback, you say, I have some feedback, are you open to hearing it? That's always a really nice way of not intimidating, in sharing feedback in a non-intimidating way. Or it could be that you have certain times where you sort of establish that, 10 minutes in, that's when the feedback's given. Those are just some examples. It's really about exploring that together of what works best for both of you. And the final thing that I always really like to do in a first mentoring and even coaching conversation is to run what's called a pre-mortem. So this is where you imagine all the ways the relationship could go wrong before it does, so you can then start putting in some efforts to fix it. So again, this will vary based on your own personal commitments, the mentee's commitments, But some things that might come up are if one or both of you have children, what happens if those child's needs suddenly take over the day and you had a meeting established, but suddenly you can't make it? How do you communicate that in a way that is building the relationship rather than you don't turn up to a meeting and they feel like you've let them down? So that's one example. There's just lots of ways that relationships can break apart. So it's useful to plan for them in advance so that, again, you're building that groundwork for that trusting, honest, open relationship with each other. So that really is, in sum, how you might start going about getting in that into that mentoring mentality and building that relationship with your mentees. Before we go into how you can then start to structure your sessions, I'll take a moment. Please let me know if you've got any questions.
Yeah, I can ask a question. Because one of the things that you mentioned was like a difference in cultural background. I'm originally from the Netherlands, and a great difference between the Netherlands and the UK is that we are not like, we don't polish things. We are very direct. And luckily I've been in like international environments for a while, so I kind of know how to tone it down. But is it, for example, a good idea to maybe acknowledge that at the start and say, hey, I'm not British, maybe I'll come across this way, you can just tell me? Like, what are some things that you can do to kind of mitigate that before it happens, rather than me actually insulting someone?
Well, I think saying it in the way you've just said, in a sort of friendly, approachable way, and in a slightly, bring that humor in of, I might say something, and this is just what we're like. I think that breaks the ice, and it means that next time you might say something that they might find offensive, they know that that's probably not the intention with which you're saying it. And it could be that you establish rules of, well, how might they come back and challenge if they feel sort of upset by what you've said. It could be that you've got a sort of a joking thing that one of my coaches had, was they had a little, like, they pretended to put up a flag of that, you know, not sure what you meant by that kind of flag. And that, again, was a slightly humorous, ice-breaking way of raising it, and then we could talk about it before we carried on. So having some little mechanism for the two of you might be a, again, relationship building way of bringing that up.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thanks.
Any other questions for anyone? Please feel to just come off mute. Yeah, Tom, so you've got your hand up.
Hi, Flora. I was just wondering, are all the mentees in the UK? I'm based in the US and was just wondering about like logistics.
I'll actually throw that question to Hannah, if I can.
Yeah. Of course. No, we've got mentors in the UK. We have a lot of mentors in the US, and I've tried to match my US people together for those logistical issues. And then we've got mentors in Europe and mentees in Europe and in Africa, all over actually. So, but I've tried to make as much sense as possible time zone wise.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Any other questions from anyone before we move on? Yeah, Mark, go ahead.
The pre-mortem idea, I love pre-mortems. I always used to try and get my clients to do them. I was slightly surprised that you suggested it at the very first meeting. I just wonder whether it's something that you want to kind of build a little bit of positive trust with somebody before you dare go through all the ways it all might go wrong. Which is not to say I don't think they're a great idea. I do think they're a great idea, but I'm sort of slightly surprised that they doing it right up front in the first meeting.
So it's about your level of comfort with it as well. So if you don't feel comfortable, then by all means, don't feel pressured into doing it. The reason I tend to do them at the start is, well, the sort of mentoring relationship like this, there's quite a lot of prep that's already gone into building that trust of it's coming through Beacon, it's coming through a trusted source. There's an element of mentor has been selected for you. So some of that groundwork that background foundational trust will have been built from it. So it might be that it feels more comfortable having that conversation up front. I quite like to use it personally because, again, there's that little bit of humor of bringing in. People mostly haven't heard of the term pre-mortem, so there's a small laugh about it. And then it's a nice way, I've found, in building that trust of talking about the ways that it could go wrong and then collectively coming up with the ways that we'd address it. Just means that we have that common ground and common language for our first sessions going through. But really leave it up to you if you don't feel quite comfortable in that first meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before we carry on? No? Okay. In which case, please do just put it in the chat as well if it comes to you. And then when we pause next, we can pick it up then. So moving on to how you might go about structuring a session. So here I've borrowed slightly from the coaching world because I think the approach is quite a useful one and gives a nice structure to the session. So in the coaching world, we call this the T-GROW model. And the way it works is you start a conversation by exploring with your mentee what it is that they want to talk about. So it's quite a free flow conversation where you ask, is there a specific challenge or an area that they want to talk about? And then if you were to have, let's say, an hour-long conversation booked in, then you'd maybe spend the first 5 to 10 minutes just exploring with them, understanding what it is specifically that they want to talk to you about. And that's also where you build in some of that, again, relationship building with them, of having that free form conversation. And then from there, moving into the goal for the session, where, again, you set an intention of what it is that you want to have accomplished together by the end of the time you have. So again, if you're thinking about an hour, you might spend maybe 5 minutes narrowing down into quite a clear intention what it is they want from you and how you can support them in that broader journey that they'll be going through. And from there, you move into R for reality. And this is a broad exploration, and I'll give a tip for this in a moment about how you might want to do this. But this, again, would probably be about 15 to maybe even 20 minutes of exploring what is happening. So if their topic is, let's pick something, managing a difficult relationship, managing a difficult conversation with a team member, then in reality, you might want to explore, well, what's happened with that team member? What's the context? What's the background? What has already happened? And really help them explore it. And a lot of the value you're adding there is just helping build their wider perspective on what is the problem or the area that they're wanting to talk about. And then moving into options. So this is where you'd probably spend in a mentoring conversation the majority of the time. So maybe about 20 minutes at least in this space, depending on how much you've spent earlier. And this is where you'd start to bring in your knowledge, your experience, your expertise about what you would suggest the mentee do. And again, in this space, make sure that while this might be more you talking, you're giving that space for the mentee to think about, well, how might they put this into practice? What does this mean for them? And what might work, what might not work. So that's a really big exploration of how you might help them get towards that overall goal. And then leaving at least about 5 minutes at the end to come to the W, which is will, which is what will the mentee do. So this is where you're pulling it back to make sure there are concrete actions coming out of your conversation. And that value is being created for your mentee and thinking about what are they going to do next. So it's a good time to reflect back on the initial intention. And what's always the case, you're never going to solve an issue within an hour or half an hour together, but you will hopefully have helped them get towards the next steps. And that's a good time as well to check in on what further conversations might the two of you want to have. Are there other things you can signpost them to? But really following this loosely, overall helps keep it very focused for the mentee on getting to a positive outcome through your conversation. So again, focusing the majority of the time in reality and options, you'll probably move back and forth between it as you suggest an option. More of that background context might come out. So don't feel you have to be restricted to one after another. But really helping narrow down that goal at the start will mean it's a lot easier to move through. And I would say from my conversations, if you ever find yourself starting to get a bit lost and confused as to what you're talking about, it's a good point to revisit that goal, because it's possible you've started to go off onto a tangent after a tangent after a tangent and not really sure what's going on. It's good to just go, can we just take a pause and check back in around our goal? So managing that difficult conversation, where are we at? And that can help you reset and get back onto more of a action-focused conversation. So within those, I've got three main techniques that I recommend you use. The first one is called wait. And this comes back to making sure that it's the mentee shining, not you. And that stands for, why am I talking? And I think this is a great question to always ask ourselves whenever we are talking, of what is the intention with which I'm saying what I'm saying? Is this about coming back to that goal, coming back to that mentee's question and delivering value for them? Or is this about me showing off my wonderful experience and just basking in that attention? So it's a really good question to ask. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be talking, but it's just good to check in. If maybe you've been talking for about 5 minutes or so, am I still focusing on what it was that we were trying to get to, or am I now talking for the sake of it? The other technique that I like to use, especially in the reality part of the conversation, is the Model T. And so this is where you explore the sort of top of the T, the breadth of the situation in full. And then you go delve into the specific tail of the T, into specific issues within what's been raised. So this means that you always start by trying to go broad in trying to understand the wider context. And this helps you maintain that neutrality in the conversation as well, of making sure you don't just jump on board with some assumptions that your mentee might be having, get that breadth, and then start going into specific tales and delving down, exploring, maybe coming up with some options, and then coming back up to the top and then delving back down into a specific. So just means that you tend to have a much better overview of what's going on before you get too stuck down in the specifics. And the final technique for this sort of structure that I'd recommend is using OR, which stands for and what else. So this is an incredibly powerful question. It seems very, very simple, but again, it helps challenge some of that very quick thinking that we are all prone to doing, of we think, okay, I need to have a difficult conversation, which means I need to set up a meeting and then this and then this. And we can be too quick to jump from each stage and each thought and get further and further stuck in our own assumptions. So asking the question, and what else, when the mentee, for example, is saying, oh, I must talk to them. You can ask, well, what else might you do? And it just gives that pause to think for a moment and go, well, what else is available? What other things have I not considered because I've limited myself? And it's really surprising when you're having a conversation with someone, how many times you can ask that question in a row without them noticing that you've asked it at all. And it's something that, feel free to ask it 2 or 3 times, as long as the mentee is actually saying new things every time you ask it. There will come a point that you ask it and they sort of frown a little bit to themselves and go, no, I don't think there is anything else. That's a great time to move on. But it is amazing how much you can help get people into much more depth and much broader thinking simply by asking those 3 words. So that's really how you might structure a session with a mentee. But the thing I really want to bring in is how to pitch what you're saying to the mentee as well in your mentoring relationship. So I'm sure some of you are familiar with the confidence competence matrix, so I've just put it up here. And how this applies to mentoring is if we take each quadrant by quadrant. So where a mentee's confidence and competence is low, this is where, as a mentor, you probably want to be more direct and directive with what you're sharing with them. So this is where we're starting to come a little bit closer to the training boundary, where it is giving a bit more instruction on what you think in that situation would be appropriate, and combining that with some of that supportive confidence building conversation of, this is what I think you should do, this is how I recommend you do it, how are you feeling about that, and support them in building up both their confidence and competence in that particular area. Probably unlikely with patient groups from my experience, but they do happen, is where you have low competence but very high confidence. This is where you want to take more of a guiding approach. So you don't want to ruin that high confidence. It's wonderful if they feel confident and motivated in what they're doing, but you probably want to then help guide them into the better way of doing things to help build them that competence up. So this is where you might go, okay, that's an interesting approach. Have you considered this? This is what I would do in this situation. And you maybe guide them to what you see as a better approach for the patient advocate in that situation. Conversely, and this is possibly where quite a few patient groups find themselves, is where their competence is actually quite high, but their confidence is low. And this often happens because very talented people come into rare diseases, but they don't necessarily think that because they don't have a medical background, for example, that they're fit to be having those conversations, which is completely wrong, but they can get really stuck in that low confidence mode. And this is where, as a mentor, your role might be a bit more about building up that support and focusing more on that inner game, let's call it, that's going on, of some of the things that they might be holding themselves back with, rather than them needing to have that experience and knowledge about how to do something. It's more about how they approach doing that thing. So that's where your questions or focus might be on how you prepare for a meeting where you're feeling nervous, or how you your approach in leading and how you can help bring out their natural leadership style. So that's where the supportive aspect will come in. And ultimately, we're trying to get to where they have both high confidence and high competence. And there, your role as a mentor is much more to be that sounding board. So to be very much a peer, where they're sharing what it is they want to do and what they're thinking, and you're giving a bit of feedback on that of, does that align with how you would approach it? And what sounds good, what might they want to think through? So that's much more of a conversation, and less about guiding them in any particular direction. So moving into the final part is about how to give feedback. And this, again, can be something that we can feel a bit awkward about, especially when we're not directly working with someone. So I've brought up 3 different models that might be useful for giving feedback. And this is something that, again, when you're talking to your mentee about sort of boundaries and acceptable behaviors, you might want to show them these 3 models and see which ones they identify with, what they're comfortable with. So again, you can build that mechanism into your relationship going forward. So the first one is the 4 A's. So I've taken this to quote my sources from the book No Rules Rules, which is Netflix's management book, which I do highly recommend. And so the 4 A's here, firstly, on the left is how to give your feedback. So it's always about making sure your feedback is with that aim to assist. So it's always about finding ways that you're constructively supporting the development of the mentee, rather than, again, point scoring or any other sort of less constructive reason why someone might want to give feedback. So it's always needs to be phrased in how this is beneficial and helpful to the mentee, and then how is it actionable. It's not very useful to give feedback that's just like, you're being a jerk right now. It would be, if you're aiming to assist, it would be that tone or that that tone is a bit abrasive. What I recommend is you soften it in this way, and then that's the actionable of you're giving them a way forward that you think would be more constructive and positive to go on. The other side of the 4As is about how one might receive feedback. So it's useful here to talk about this with your mentee as well, but think about this for you personally. Because of that mentoring two-way conversation, you might be receiving feedback from your mentee as well. So it's important to, when receiving that feedback, to be appreciative that it's being given with that aim to assist. And so to, rather than putting our back up and being concerned of how dare someone give me feedback, to appreciate the reason they're giving it is to support your development. But the most important aspect of it is that it's up to the receiver of the feedback to decide whether they're going to accept it or discard it. So we cannot expect that our mentee is going to take everything that we say and do everything that we tell them. And that is 100% their prerogative to decide what they do with the feedback they get. They have to maintain their own agency over that. So bear that in mind, to not take it as a personal insult if they decide not to accept the feedback. And likewise, for you as a mentor, if you're getting feedback, recognize that it's okay for you to decide as well internally what you do with that feedback. Usually if it's done with that aim to assist, there should be something to reflect on, even if you don't necessarily agree with the specific feedback and what they suggest you do as an action. So it's always an opportunity to reflect, but never feel pressured or feel like you have to pressure the mentee into taking that feedback either. So that's sort of how to approach the giving of feedback. The ways to then communicate it, I've got two different models here. So one is WWW and EBI, which again, some of you might be familiar with. And this is where we're building sort of more positive inquiry. So we're very prone to first focus on the negative and only see what went wrong and only think about the bad stuff. But there's so much learning that can come from what went well. And also there's a lot of confidence building that comes from thinking about what went well, even if it's a very small thing in a big challenge. There's always something positive that we can find that we can then build on and improve on. So what is recommended is when you're giving feedback is to start with, well, what went well with this person? What went well with this situation? And from there, rather than going, but then this went bad, go, and it could be even better if this was done. And so again, this is building the constructive feedback, the areas that could be improved, into that positive mentality of continuous improvement, rather than that sense of blame and judgment of failure, which we then can feel very stuck in and not sure how to get out of. So it's continuing the conversation from what went well to what can be improved, rather than breaking it up with a but. So the final model that I wanted to share is usually used where something has gone wrong and something has been challenging or difficult, or possibly even an unacceptable behavior has come up in your relationship, where you've heard them describe something that you think has crossed a boundary. So the model for this is called IDEA. And this is where you start with your intention for your feedback. So this comes back to the 4As of the reason I'm sharing this with you is I think this is an area where you could improve your practice. You could improve being a leader. We could improve our mentoring relationship. Oh, apologies. The D is then where you describe what that behavior was and what the impact was. So when you said you're a jerk, that was quite upsetting to me. I'm here to be supportive. And so that for me felt like we've fractured the relationship a little bit. Obviously, I'm not expecting them to say that to you, but that's just an example here with how this might go. The E is then where you start to exchange the ideas between both of you in a two-way street of how might this be improved. And so again, it's important here that while you are the one giving the feedback, there is a conversation that's happening, especially at this stage of E, where you discuss and explore what might be alternatives, and you're listening as well as talking. And then the A is the action, the agreeing to act. What are we going to do now? It might be one of us has to change, both of us have to change. what's going to be the outcome that we're both agreeing to going forward. So this, again, you might start to sense that this follows a little bit that T-GROW model as well, where you start with the goal, the intention, you go into reality, you start discussing options, and then you come out with what is that action, what is that will that will come out of the conversation. So that really brings it to an end here. So I'll just pause for some questions before we sum up. But we've got a good comment here from Phil to say that, would you encourage mentors to ask for feedback from mentees and put aside time for this? Absolutely. I think that's a really positive thing to build into the relationship. Depending on how frequently you're talking, I would suggest maybe at a minimum once a month, having 5 or 10 minutes at the end of your conversation to check in on that relationship, check back into maybe your pre-mortem and see how you're doing. Is anything going wrong? So completely agree, Phil, that would be a great thing to build in. Do we have any other questions or comments around the group?
Yeah, I would like to ask another question, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
What is a good way of saying, I don't know? Because I feel like you might get in a situation where they ask specific things, or they might run into issues that maybe you need to think about it, or you just genuinely don't know how to approach it. Like, what could be a good strategy to communicate that?
Yeah, well, I think saying just purely I don't know is a good thing to do. I think, again, as part of that relationship building, it's recognizing that as a mentor, you won't have all the answers. You're not all-knowing, all-seeing person. So it's having those phrases. So saying, oh, that's a really good question. I'm not quite sure of the answer. I might need to go away and look into it for you. Or recognize that it might not be your level of expertise. So seeing if you can signpost the mentee then to someone else to go, oh, I'm actually not sure about that. Let me see if I have a colleague that might be able to answer it, or maybe that's something we can go back to Beacon with to ask that question. So I would say never just leave it at, I don't know. Have a follow-up area to go to, but don't feel pressured into pretending you know something either, or that expectation that you have to know everything. So help signpost onwards, but acknowledge if you don't know.
I was just going to say, if we don't know, I think the idea is to discuss together how two of us can find the solution forward, or the information. And also, I think, am I right in thinking another key aspect of mentoring is to share the network each of us has, because all of us have some kind of a professional or social network, which may be a useful resource.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great suggestion, Kamlesh.
Thank you.
Perfect. Well, I will just bring us then to our final reflection. So again, if we just wanted to take a minute or so to think about what your key learnings are from today, from how to get into that mentor mentality, how to set up a relationship, how to structure it, how to delve into the detail with your mentee, or how to get feedback. What's been your key learning? What will you do differently tomorrow as a result? And if you look back at your original intention, to what extent were you able to achieve that? So again, I'll give you a minute or so to feedback. And then if anyone wants to share it, please do put it in the chat or come off mute. But I do hope that there are things that you have taken away. Okay. Thank you everyone for sharing everything in the chat. The final thing for me is just to say thank you very much for listening. I've got my contact details up, so if you did want to follow up on anything, or you had a question you didn't have a chance to ask, then please do send me an email and I'd be happy to chat outside of this. But that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Flora. That was such a great session. I can tell by all of the feedback that we're already getting that there was so much really useful content there. So a massive thank you to you for delivering that for us. I will then get on and just give some final notices. Just share my screen again. Okay, so we have got some more training coming up. So next week, on Thursday, the 23rd, there is some training on mental health and resilience. This is a training open to both mentors and mentees on the program, covering about how to protect your mental health and how to support your mentee in their mental health, and with a good focus on the intricacies of being within the rare disease space. So that's going to be led by Rare Minds, and that's next Thursday at 11 a.m. On to the next slide. So the welcome event. So this is happening on Thursday, 30th of March from 1 until 3:30 GMT. So this is when I will give you all of the information that you guys want about the program. I'll fill you in on everything. I'll also give you really good introduction to Beacon and the work that we're doing for those of you who are newer to us. And you'll meet the Beacon team, all of your contacts who from Beacon, and most importantly, you will get the chance to meet your mentee for the first time. So it will be ahead of this meeting where we'll send out the pairing emails. You'll find out who your mentee is, and then hopefully you guys will get together for the first time within this session. So it's a really important session. If you haven't signed up for it, please do sign up. I do have the link for it. And I will put all the links in the chat once I've come off this. So yeah, that's 2 weeks time. So hopefully to see you all there. And another thing that we do that I'd like to highlight that we have for this round of the patient group mentoring program is that we have an area on our resources hub. So our resources hub is like an online platform that we have with loads of information about rare diseases. It has courses on all sorts of topics from fundraising to drug repurposing. It's basically just an online portal that we use to disseminate all of our information. But this year we have got a very specific area for the mentoring program on our resources hub, and it's got loads of useful and important documents, templates, all sorts on here. So as you can see, this is kind of what it looks like. There's a What's Next for Mentors course. So this is going to be just all of the information you need to know about the program, and also there'll be signposting and all sorts on there, and the training recording. So this recording from this training will be on this area in the resources hub, and that's how you'll be able to access it, and the slides and everything as well. So we'll be able to send the links out for that. So that What's Next for Mentors course would be really great if everyone could get that to get through that before the start of the program on the 30th of March. It really won't take very long. It's probably 10 minutes max to just click through, and it will just really help you get prepared so you know exactly what you're going into. Okay, so that is it from me. I want to say a massive thank you for everyone for coming. A massive thank you to Flora. She's had to head off now, but thank you for